In August 1945, the world changed forever. The war that had consumed continents and claimed millions of lives was over, ended not by armies meeting on battlefields, but by the blinding light of a weapon unlike anything seen before. In Washington, D.C., far from the smoldering ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two men sat across from each other in a small government office. One wore the uniform of a United States Army general, his presence as disciplined and unyielding as the chain of command he represented. The other, thin and weary, carried a silence heavier than metals or rank could bear. They were General Leslie Richard Groves and J. Robert Oppenheimer, the soldier and the scientist who together had given humanity the power to destroy itself. Oppenheimer, the theoretical physicist who had once quoted the Bhagavad Gita upon witnessing the first atomic explosion, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," now faced the man who had made the explosion possible. Groves, the commanding officer of the Manhattan Project, had turned an idea into an industrial miracle, marshaling thousands of scientists, engineers, and workers across America's secret cities. Together, they had achieved what no civilization had before. They had split the atom and weaponized the fabric of creation itself. But as the victory celebrations echoed through the streets of New York and Washington, a different kind of silence filled that room. Oppenheimer, his face pale and gaunt, spoke not of triumph but of fear. "General," he said, "we have made a thing that cannot be controlled." Groves, ever the pragmatist, leaned back in his chair and replied with the calm authority of a man who had served his purpose. "Doctor, we made a weapon to end the war, and it worked." That statement hung in the air like smoke. To Groves, the atomic bomb had been a necessity, a brutal but decisive instrument to save lives and secure victory. To Oppenheimer, it had become a moral reckoning. The scientist who had worked tirelessly to end one war had perhaps started another, one that would never end, fought not with armies, but with fear. Outside, the world hailed them as heroes. Inside that room, they were haunted men. The Manhattan Project had succeeded beyond imagination, but success carried a shadow. Oppenheimer's mind raced with the implications, the future of science, the responsibility of those who wield knowledge, and the terrible certainty that humanity had crossed a threshold from which it could never return. The war was over, but peace felt uncertain. America stood as the dominant power, yet uneasy questions lingered in every corridor of government and every conscience that understood what had been done. As the clock ticked toward the atomic age, Groves and Oppenheimer faced not just each other, but history itself. What had they unleashed, and what would come next? In early 1942, before the tide of war had turned, the United States embarked on a secret endeavor that would alter the fate of nations. The fear was urgent and real. Intelligence reports suggested that Nazi Germany was pursuing a weapon of unimaginable power, a bomb born from the very heart of the atom. President Franklin D. Roosevelt approved an initiative so secret that only a handful of men in the world knew its full scope. It would come to be known as the Manhattan Project. At its helm stood two figures who could not have been more different yet were bound by necessity. General Leslie Groves, the stern, pragmatic engineer from the U.S. Army Corps, and J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant and enigmatic physicist from Berkeley. Groves had just completed overseeing the construction of the Pentagon, a project that demanded precision, secrecy, and relentless control. When he was assigned to lead the Manhattan Project, he moved swiftly, selecting Oppenheimer as its scientific director despite skepticism from others. Oppenheimer had no Nobel Prize, no prior experience managing large laboratories, and a reputation for intellectual restlessness. But Groves saw something in him, a spark of vision, a unifying mind capable of turning theory into reality. Together, they assembled one of the most extraordinary teams in history. Scientists from around the world, Niels Bohr, Enrico Fermi, Richard Feynman, and many others, gathered in isolated desert towns like Los Alamos, New Mexico. These were the hidden cities of war, where entire communities lived behind barbed wire and the secrets of the atom were guarded more fiercely than gold. At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, massive electromagnetic plants enriched uranium. At Hanford, Washington, plutonium reactors thrummed with relentless purpose. Industrial might merged with intellectual brilliance on a scale never before seen. The pace was relentless, the secrecy absolute. Even those building the machinery often did not know what it was for. Only a handful of top scientists and military officers grasped the final goal, a chain reaction powerful enough to end the war. Amid the dessert wines and factory smoke, a new world was taking shape. Groves demanded efficiency and results, and Oppenheimer delivered, often at the expense of his own health. He worked tirelessly, driving his team forward, inspired by a mix of duty, curiosity, and fear. Then, on July 16, 1945, in the barren desert of New Mexico, their combined effort bore fruit. The first atomic bomb, codenamed Trinity, was detonated. A searing light split the dawn, brighter than the sun, followed by a shockwave that rolled across the desert floor. Those who witnessed it were struck silent. Some cheered, some prayed. Oppenheimer stood still, his mind echoing the ancient words of the Bhagavad Gita, "The weapon worked." Humanity had entered a new epoch, the nuclear age. For Groves, the success of the Trinity test marked a strategic victory. For Oppenheimer, it was the beginning of doubt. The unimaginable had become reality, and soon, the world would bear witness to its power. In October 1945, a few months after the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oppenheimer and Groves met once again in Washington, D.C. The war had ended, and America had emerged as the dominant global power, but the shadow of the atomic bomb loomed larger than any victory parade. Their meeting was quiet, almost ordinary in appearance, but the weight of what had transpired hung heavily in the air. Two men sat across a table, representatives of different worlds, one of science and conscience, the other of military order and strategic calculation. Groves began the conversation with a directness that reflected his Army background. He spoke of the Manhattan Project as a triumph of American ingenuity and industrial power, emphasizing the meticulous planning and unyielding coordination that had turned scattered research into a weapon capable of ending a global conflict. Every decision, he argued, had been guided by the urgency of war and the necessity to maintain the United States as a secure power. He highlighted the strategic importance of the atomic bomb as a deterrent, a tool that guaranteed that no enemy would ever threaten American soil again. Oppenheimer listened, his fingers tracing the rim of a cup of coffee. Then he spoke, his voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of unease. He spoke not of strategy, but of responsibility. He spoke of the thousands who had died in Japan, of the ethical and moral consequences that now fell upon humanity. The bomb, he said, was not merely a military achievement, it was a Pandora's box, opened by human hands, whose contents could never be fully contained. He questioned whether the world was prepared to wield such power, and whether science, pursued without reflection, could bring civilization to the brink of annihilation. The dialogue grew tense, a clash of perspectives that mirrored the broader debate forming across the globe. Groves, grounded in duty and military necessity, saw the atomic bomb as a triumph of organization and technological might. Oppenheimer, steeped in the abstract principles of physics and conscience, saw the moral abyss into which the world had stepped. Their conversation traversed technical details, strategic considerations, and philosophical dilemmas, reflecting the profound intersection of human intellect and human power. This exchange between scientist and general foreshadowed the Cold War dynamics to come. One worldview championed control and dominance, the other caution and ethical responsibility. The conversation revealed that the success of the Manhattan Project was not an end, but a beginning, the start of an era in which human ingenuity could bring unprecedented destruction. By the time the meeting concluded, both men understood that the questions raised in that room would define the decades to follow. The atomic bomb was no longer just a weapon, it was a symbol of the complex, often uneasy, marriage of science and strategy in the modern world. As 1945 gave way to 1946 and the world struggled to comprehend the implications of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the consequences of the meeting between Oppenheimer and Groves became increasingly clear. The atomic bomb had not only ended a war, but had also inaugurated a new era, the nuclear age. The United States now held a weapon of unparalleled destructive power, a fact that reshaped global politics almost overnight. The Soviet Union, observing from across the continent, accelerated its own nuclear program, and a tense standoff emerged that would define international relations for decades. The arms race had begun. Oppenheimer, once celebrated as a scientific hero, began to face an inner and public struggle. He became an advocate for the careful management of nuclear weapons, urging policymakers to consider the moral and ethical implications of atomic warfare. His opposition to unchecked proliferation and his calls for international control over nuclear technology made him a controversial figure in the emerging Cold War. In 1954, his security clearance was revoked in a highly publicized hearing, a political defeat that reflected the tension between scientific conscience and national security imperatives. Yet Oppenheimer's influence endured through his warnings about the dangers of atomic proliferation and his insistence that humanity must confront the responsibilities that accompany its technological achievements. General Leslie Groves, by contrast, remained a symbol of military efficiency and success. He had overseen the Manhattan Project from inception to conclusion, coordinating vast industrial resources and guiding thousands of personnel to create a weapon that decisively ended World War II. His legacy was tied to accomplishment and national defense, a testament to the power of organization, determination, and disciplined leadership. While he understood the gravity of the weapon, his focus remained on strategy and ensuring that the United States maintained its position of dominance in the post-war world. The atomic age also transformed society, science, and global consciousness. Nations invested in nuclear research, and governments realized that technological mastery could determine the balance of power. Oppenheimer and Groves had each played a pivotal role in this transformation. One represented the ethical and philosophical challenges inherent in such unprecedented power. The other exemplified the organizational and strategic skill required to bring monumental projects to fruition. Their collaboration, forged in the crucible of war, had changed the course of history. Today, the story of their encounter serves as a reminder of the responsibilities of leadership, the consequences of scientific achievement, and the complex interplay between power and conscience. The Manhattan Project was not merely a historical event. It was the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one in which knowledge could protect or destroy. The meeting between Oppenheimer and Groves stands as a symbol of the profound human dilemmas that accompany technological progress, dilemmas that continue to resonate in every debate about science, warfare, and global security.